Welcome to Mac Advantage, Professional Perspective in Accounting. My name is Scott Showalter. I'm the director of the Jenkins Masters of Accounting program. We are very fortunate today to have Joel Black join us. Joel is the current chair of the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. His career does just not stop there. Joel has a very long career serving state and local governments throughout the country. Additionally, Joel and I have known each other and worked with each other over many years. At this time, I will just jump into the first question for Joel. And so, Joel, welcome. You've served in many roles in your career. Please provide a brief summary of your career experiences.
Sure. Thanks, Scott. And thanks for having me. It's very exciting to be here. Always good to see you again. So my career was primarily in public accounting. I started with KPMG and was there for 12 years, which is primarily where we worked together for a number of those years. And then I moved to a regional firm in the South, Malden and Jenkins, and was there for 16 years prior to coming to the GASB in 2020. I would say that, beyond the first year at my KPMG career, I did a little bit of everything. One of those was auditing a state or local government. I was in the audit practice primarily, although did some advisory throughout a number of those years in both firms. But worked on a government in that first year, was really fascinated by kind of how the government operates, how impactful this is to all of us that live in the United States, right? We all have state and local governments that are providing vital services, and understanding how that works, how the government decides what it does was fascinating. And so I kind of raised my hand and said, I'll work on more of those. And by my second, third year, that's all I did. And that's really all I did for the remainder of my 28 years in public accounting, was serve state and local governments. My last year at Malden and Jenkins, I was the partner in charge of the entire audit practice. So I was responsible for more, but still my client focus was state and local governments. And in my later years, mid-years at Malden and Jenkins, I started getting involved with the AICPA a lot, volunteering on task forces and things, and started working with the state and local government, was on the state and local government expert panel, got more involved there, really kind of paying attention to not just the GASB standards that were out and my clients had to implement, but also the process that GASB was going through, writing comment letters on behalf of the AICPA. And from there, the AICPA nominated me to serve on the Government Accounting Standards Advisory Council, the GASAC, which is the official council to the GASB. And at that point, I guess I kind of got on the radar somewhere. And as they were interviewing for a new chair, they asked if I was interested. It's a great opportunity. And so in 2020, I was lucky enough to be appointed chair of the GASB, and that's where I am now.
Great. Well, let's just springboard off of that. Since you mentioned you are the current chair of the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, a lot of people may not know what that role is, and even what GASB is, and how it is similar or different than the Financial Accounting Standards Board. So if you can answer all those questions, that'd be great.
Sure. There are three standard setters that set GAAP in the United States: the FASB, the GASB, and then the FASB, which I know you're familiar with for the federal government. But we essentially operate really just like the FASB. In fact, they're a sister standard setting board. Both of us are overseen by the Financial Accounting Foundation, which is a board of trustees that appoints the members to the FASB and the GASB. We share offices. In fact, just on the other side of this wall, the FASB board members' offices start and go down that hall. So they're right next to us. And so we do the same thing the FASB does. We just do it for state and local governments. And one might ask, and often kind of does, why do governments need a separate set of GAAP from private companies or nonprofits even? But I would say in particular, the FASB tends to be focused on public corporations, private sector entities. And if you think about the missions of those entities, generally to generate income, wealth, growth for their shareholders, investors, government missions are very different, right? The government's mission isn't to generate income or wealth or growth. It's to provide services to a community, pool the resources of that community to provide services that maybe couldn't or shouldn't be provided by the private sector. Education, public safety, transportation, transit, things like that. And in pooling those resources and then providing those services, there's a kind of public accountability that's unique to the mission of a government and a responsibility of governments to really show the members of the community that provided those resources, primarily through taxes, how they used those resources and on what they used and what were the cost of the services they provide. And so when we set standards, while many of our standards are similar to the FASB, a lot of them are different, is usually about that public accountability lens and that lens of looking at providing information not just to investors, which the governments do have through the municipal bond community, but also to citizens and to legislative officials who may not have access to financial information except for maybe an annual financial report. So when we think about all those different users and that different mission, that's how we set our gap and our standards and why they are different than the FASB in many cases.
Great. Yeah, you're probably the most significant board that people don't know a lot about. People know that, but you fulfill obviously a very important role, particularly when people want to understand the financial condition of their state or local government and basically how they're spending those resources. That's when you definitely come into play to help with that. And so you talked that you've been there for a little while. Maybe you can just comment on some of your most recently completed efforts, and then we're obviously going to go to some things coming down the road that we can look for. But if you can sort of start out, as you kind of look back over the last several years, what would be some projects that you think our audience would be particularly interested in?
Yes, I'd highlight maybe a couple aspects of two of our more recent standards. One is Statement 102, which was a risk disclosure standard for concentrations or constraints that actually is effective for the first time in fiscal year 2025, so the year we're in now. And I highlight that one because this is when a government has a particular concentration of maybe a resource provider, but we didn't want it to be boilerplate. We didn't want it to just every government that has them to disclose them. We wanted the risk to be heightened for the government to then necessitate a disclosure. And the interesting fact that kind of is converging with the implementation of that standard is what's going on with the federal government and its funding of state and local governments right now. It, in many cases, is a substantial resource provider to at least certain types of governments, in particular states with Medicaid funding, for example. And 2 years ago, I might not have said, is there really a heightened risk that funding source might go away? It probably wasn't. In today's environment, it's at least something governments have to think about and providing a disclosure. So interesting standard that's coming out in today's environment. Another one I might highlight is Statement 103. I think this is important for all of us as citizens, and one important aspect of this was our financial reporting model improvements. Could have been a really big standard. In the end, we just made what we would call targeted improvements to the financial reporting model about various kind of things within it. I'll highlight the management discussion and analysis. I think that's one of the most important improvements we made. And what's interesting about, we've always required, for 25 years, we've required an MD&A or management discussion analysis as part of GAAP in this state and local government financial statements. But what we saw and what we were trying to prove was the analysis part. We saw a lot of things, government has this much in revenue, it went up or down by X percent, and that was kind of it. We wanted more why. And so we really hammered and talked about why did it increase that, or decrease that amount, including in the analysis. But the other thing that I think is really important to note that we highlighted in Statement 103 was the audience for the management discussion analysis. Our conceptual framework, our rules that govern how we set standards say when we think about the financial statements and the notes to the note disclosures and everything, we're supposed to assume the reader is knowledgeable about concepts of government accounting or government finance. And so you're a sophisticated, kind of knowledgeable user to read the notes, and that's how we assume you are. We went against that for the MD&A, kind of thinking back to that citizen or even those legislative officials sometimes who likely aren't knowledgeable about government accounting and financial concepts. And so we said government's management, when writing the MD&A, actually should think about that reader of the MD&A that isn't the knowledgeable user. And so that is really our trying to get a place for a citizen isn't really, an accountant, doesn't understand all the financial concepts, a place for them to go and get an analysis of what the government did with the taxpayer money that went to it that year. So I think that that's an interesting statement that will be effective in 2026.
Great. If you think about your users of the financial statements, making that MD&A more readable will really, I think, inform. They may not have the interest to wade into a balance sheet with the footnotes, but that MD&A written from more user perspective, I'm sure will be a lot in that area. Every time I get in a corporate set of statements MD&A, my head spins. So I'm sure you've made some good changes there.
We hope so.
Speaking of moving forward, why don't you comment on some things on your agenda going forward? Maybe some of the new projects you're looking at.
Sure. I'm excited about all of them. I'll highlight maybe 4 real high level and 2, and then maybe a little bit more on the other 2. One, the biggest one is our revenue and expense recognition project. It's doing a number of things. It's very broad. I'd say maybe the most significant thing is for things you might currently think of as exchange or exchange-like transactions. We're really trying to fill in the gap because our current literature focuses more on the non-exchange, like taxes and grant revenue, doesn't actually have a lot of literature for those more exchange type transactions. And so we're looking to bring something like Topic 606 from the FASB literature into our literature in some way to address and build up the gap related to those exchange type transactions. So big, broad project. Looking at going concern, severe financial stress for the government in the government context, because our current literature is very similar to, if not almost the same as the FASB's literature. And that really may not make sense. And our view is that probably doesn't make sense for the government environment, who, when governments might be in severe financial stress, but legally can't cease to exist or go out of business or even declare bankruptcy. And so, how should we think about those types of circumstances in a government context, and when disclosure should be provided beyond maybe a pure going concern concept, which is really about ceasing to exist, but also add in some, well, if you're in severe financial stress, even if you can't cease to exist as a government, you should have some of those disclosures. So an interesting project where we're trying to tailor that concept for government. So couple of other ones that I'm really excited about. One is infrastructure asset project. If there's something that I heard when I came here from the users of the financial report, that they said, we're really missing something here. Something in the report isn't, as effective as it should be. It was infrastructure assets, roads, bridges, water treatment plants and pipes, distribution systems, those types of assets, really long-lived, pretty unique to government in many cases. Users told us that the carrying value on the statement of net position wasn't always very reflective of the condition of those assets, and they wanted more information about what they would call a deferred maintenance liability. So we're really, as a board, trying to address those concerns users have, improve the accounting, but do it in the most cost beneficial way, because you could get pretty carried away with requirements that get really good at evaluating condition of infrastructure, but it would cost a lot for every state and local government to do that. And so we're trying to balance better information with the cost in that project. Final one I'll talk about is a different one for us. It actually won't be GASB statement number 10 whatever. It's our voluntary digital financial reporting projects. So voluntary is an important part of that for us. This is we call it a technology project. It's a new kind of project, but this was us stepping back and looking at how is technology changing financial reporting, from preparation of the financial report, even auditing of that financial report, to how users of that financial information consume and ingest it. And what we really saw was that consumption was changing, that users were trying to extract digitized information, or they really wanted digitized information. And so instead of kind of letting the market determine what was digitized, how it was digitized, what it meant, we are creating what we call a taxonomy, a digital financial reporting framework that is kind of like a data structure rule that allows for us to think about users consuming digitized information where they may not have all the context of seeing it on a page, even if it's a PDF page, where they have all the information around it, and it's a machine reading it, right? And so we're trying to create a rule that humans can use, but also machines can use to learn, to understand information as they extract it. And when they provide the information to the ultimate user, it doesn't lose the context surrounding it, that it's better defined, it has a semantic meaning that is meaningful to the user, so that the right information is getting to the user and understood by the user in the same way as if they'd read it on a page in a PDF, the way kind of financial reporting currently resides. And so this data rule, data structure, machine readable kind of rule is a new type of project for us, but we're excited to do it because we think it kind of makes GAAP continue to be relevant even as technology is changing financial reporting and information consumption.
Well, good. Clearly, that list you just went through defeats anybody that thinks financial reporting is boring. Definitely a lot going on there, particularly if you tie that going concern to that risk standard you started up front. You may have some state and local governments all of a sudden looking at a going concern that wasn't thinking about it and having a service disruption. So some interesting plays there as that comes out. So thinking about challenges that state and locals are out there, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges of state and local governments as they put together their financial results and report their financial results?
I think the biggest challenge, I've heard it, I don't know that it's going away anytime soon. And it gets back to us trying to minimize the burden, that cost we put on it. It's resources. Governments struggle for resources, whether it's people or technology, I would say. Just investment in the accounting and finance function by a government tends to be, kind of tamped down, right? When you think of governments, and even when they're trying to not increase taxes or even reduce taxes, and then even if they have the availability to spend extra money, they're much more likely to spend it on an extra teacher or an extra police officer or an extra firefighter than they are another accountant, or investing in technology in the accounting function. And so governments are challenged by that. And they, we try to be conscious of that, try to help minimize the burden when we can. But I think that is their biggest challenge, is they have enough people to do the job, to do it timely, like the public corporations get their information done much more quickly. They typically have invested more in both people and technology in their accounting functions than governments tend to. So I think that's really, as I go and talk to state and local governments and their finance shops, that's their biggest challenge.
Yeah, that was my experience as well. That hasn't changed over the years, as you say, unfortunately.
Right.
Of course, you and I think you can never have too many accountants, but I'm not sure the general citizen feels the same way about that. So kind of shifting on a personal side here, what do you do in your spare time, when you're not advancing accounting and reporting standards for the state and local governments? There must be something there you do in your spare time.
I am, Scott, pretty geeky technical accountant. I do like to talk about accounting, but I have other interests as well. I do like to travel a fair amount. So my wife and I do travel. We've done more of that since the kids are kind of off to college and their careers. We have more time for that. We enjoy hiking as well. And I'm a pretty avid follower of certain sports. Football I enjoy, both pro and college. Baseball, big baseball fan, especially pro baseball. And more recently into Formula One racing. I guess a recent story that combines a couple of those of travel. This was around this time last year. My older son and I went to Italy, to Monza, and saw the F1 race, which was a good combination of traveling to Italy and seeing a F1 race in person, which was quite an experience.
Great. Well, but living in the Northeast, you have some great opportunities to do some hiking up there. There's some beautiful mountains and hills up in that area. So just to kind of wrap out our conversation today, do you have any final comments or thoughts you'd like to leave with our audience today before we turn them back to their day jobs?
Sure. Scott, I think it's just hoping people consider government accounting in some way as they think about their careers and choices. It was a big importance to me. And I think it's a big importance to a lot of people to provide back to their communities, to give back, to provide public service. And I think being a CPA generally is being a public servant of sort, right? Of being a resource provider to a community. But I think government accounting kind of takes that up a notch, whether you work for the government itself, whether you, like I did or you did, work for a firm that audits and your clients are state and local governments. So you're helping lots of different state and local governments and providing that audit that provides that transparency to citizens and gives reliability to that information. I think that's quite a public service. That's giving back to your community. It's really fascinating to see how governments operate, like I talked about before. So I hope that listeners, observers of this will at least consider that government accounting as they think about their careers moving forward.
Great. Joe, I want to thank you for the time you spent today. I think clearly you've probably opened up a lot of minds to people that didn't even know anything about the standard setting, but about the industry itself and what's out there. So I want to thank you very much for spending the time today to help our listeners understand the role of the GASB, but also, more importantly, the role of state and local governments in fulfilling needs of citizens. So thank you for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Scott. It's great.